Hello there everyone and welcome back. It is time finally to talk about the Tyranids, the lovable little space creatures that just want to eat your faces. And while this introduction is a little bit annoying since the Tyranids start off the battle completely stealth, and it apparently shows for your introduction to this fleet when you start deploying them. Which means your fleet is completely invisible to your enemy and they have no idea where you deployed or what you're going to be doing, let alone the number of your fleet. And that's kind of convenient, I suppose, although with the ability to set your stances during the deployment phase, if you have like a bunch of light cruisers and frigates, you can still technically do the same, but for Tyranids, it allows you to even hide your cruisers and your battleship, which is really damn important considering that the Tyranids are all about getting up in your face, up close and personal. They're basically putting the orcs to shame with the sheer potential they have in close. Although, a lot of the Tyranids' firepower strictly comes into their boarding potential. Don't get me wrong, they have macro cannons, they have lances, they have everything else that the other factions have is strictly limited to almost exclusively 4,500 unit range, and unless you're specifically going for all weaponry, they don't synergize the best with the boarding potential since, of course, you're eating the crew, you're killing ships just by making them inert as opposed to actually kill them outright. And when you have to get through the shields with most of your macro weaponry, then that can be a bit problematic. But by God are the Tyranids fun to play with there. With, like I said already, they have a lot of tools for doing damage to the crew. Their torpedoes are almost strictly boarding torpedoes, which sadly they're not tracking based torpedoes like they were in the tabletop game, but with the assault ships, with the torpedoes, and the fact they have 270-degree boarding, they are going to eat a crew almost immediately, so much so that even the Space Marines are going to be put to shame with the sheer boarding potential. Although, don't get me wrong, the Space Marines are like the only faction that can actually match the Tyranids in what they can do for boarding. The Tyranids are specialized towards it, without a doubt. Like I said, boarding torpedoes, assault crafts, and just the sheer numbers in comparison to the Space Marines, since most of their fleet being a little bit cheaper, they are pretty damn good. Just to help give you a little bit of understanding how the boarding works for Armada 2, this is the list of all the different categories for the boarding itself. Like, there are multiple integers between the different categories where the amount of damage you do is randomized, but in the case of exceptional troop value, boarding potential, only the Tyranids and Space Marines have access to that. Even the orcs don't, alas. But it makes it so your boarding is really damn reliable, and that goes without saying. That is kind of an important fact to know, since if you're relying a little bit on that RNG, that variance, then you may sometimes get a little bit underwhelmed by the boarding potential with some unlucky rolls. We've all been there. But how the Tyranids are supposed to get in close there is pretty damn straightforward. They only have a single rush ability, which is their all-ahead full for comparison's sake, and it mixes both the falls maneuver with a massive speed boost, a 2-second speed boost, and it's a ridiculous amount of distance you can cover, considering the fact that the Tyranid cruisers and the battleship basically go the same speed as a normal Imperial Navy vessel, so they're not going to be ganging up on you really quickly, so you're going to be relying on that rush ability a lot, and it's almost exclusively going to be meant for getting into boarding range with that said. So you are going to have a bit of a hard time following up, unless you have like feeder tendrils or other abilities that allow you to pull the ship back in. And that is one of the weapons that the Tyranids actually have. It's a prow based weapon that you can either choose to have it grab a ship and pull yourself forward while pulling the enemy towards your fleet. You can also have a secondary function for when you're already in close that it allows you to slowly eat off the crew. It basically is a damage over time effect, and it stacks. It does have a notably long cooldown though, a little bit like around 90 seconds, maybe a minute if I'm remembering it correctly, so you need to make sure you have multiple ships hitting the same target, and I believe you keep the effect in full unless they get out of range. Also, if you notice carefully there, all the Tyranids have a little bit of a spore cloud circling around them there, and that is, for all intents and purposes, their shields for how it works in Armada 2 with the Tyranids. It also doubles as their point defense, and they have a lot of point defense available to them when their shields are fully charged. They can have like almost double the count, I believe, of most of the other cruisers when you compare their stats. Although the catch with that, of course, is as your shields go down, you lose your point defense until they get recharged. So there will be periods of vulnerability where bombers and our vessels can dive on you aggressively, almost can time it perfectly for when the shields go down. You can expect a massive retaliation of bombers and torpedoes to capitalize on your weakened state. But if you do manage to keep your shields up as you are getting to 4,500 unit range, then you are gaining additional bonuses to help whittle down your prey. For you have a built-in Nurgle cloud effect from our Armada 1, and the more shields you have, you're basically doing 1 point of damage directly to the hull for every 100 shields you have on your ships. And this, if I'm understanding correctly, stacks with every single ship that's within reach. It's not like Nurgle that was limited to only like a single ship doing its damage at a time. And this at least synergizes really well with your ramming potential that you could do with your Massive Claws. For, interestingly enough, the Massive Claws, while they technically don't explain anything on the weapon itself, through testing, it seems like that if you ram the ship, at least on the prow, you're taking no damage at all, so you do not need to worry about like a brace for impact or anything like that to help minimize the damage. If you can rush in there and just ram the ship with the claws, then you are not suffering any penalties or consequences for doing so, and it opens up nicely, of course, for said boarding, as we talked about already. And even better, for flavor's sake, these Massive Claws will also have an animation clamping down on their unsuspecting victim as you ram it to Kingdom Come. Although sadly, it's not a perfect type of animation, since there is a little bit of glitching, at least like clipping through a lot of the ships. It's still amazing to see that the attention to detail that Nintendo's put into this subtle little factor. Even the macro cannons themselves, the pyro acid, is not something to scoff at, even though it's like the only weapon that actually needs to get through the shield, so there is going to be a lot of difficulty synergizing with the other weapons like the bioplasma and of course your ramming and boarding. But if you were to prioritize the pyro acid for like a fleet composition, then you do have the benefit of igniting the ships on fire quite frequently, especially with like an upgrade potential that I think doubles the critical hit chance with the pyro acid. So there's some value in like different playstyles for Tyranids based almost entirely what you're looking for. Although there's still a lot of nuances I don't quite understand to the Tyranids, like how the synaptic link works. I almost feel like it's related to whatever ship is your admiral ship has the synaptic link that prevents you from taking morale damage. And in these matches alone, it seems like morale damage is still being done to some of these ships, so it feels like there may still be a little bit of bugs to be fleshed out with the Tyranids, or maybe it is part of the game that I'm not quite aware of just yet with my limited play testing. For all honesty, my preparation for this video and the little bit I did on streaming previously has been my first real experience with the Tyranids. So you are kind of listening to my first raw impression of the Tyranids as opposed to all the other factions, which I did have a little bit of time to understand and get to know. But with that said, have a look at this ridiculous roster of the Tyranids. Good God. They had the custom points in the tabletop game, and that's a lot of the reason why there's so many different varieties to the Tyranids. It is a complementary to whatever playstyle you want. Like I said before, if you want to go strictly with pyro acid and try and burn a ship to death and go for raw damage, you got that. If you just want to strictly eat the crew, you got a plethora of different type of carrier ships, as well as like a handful of ships that are capable of tentacles, which I mentioned before, that can grapple and of course kill the crew of a ship over time if you get the convenience to activate that secondary effect. So you got a plethora there, as well as, like I mentioned, the boring torpedoes as an alternative means. If the flesh hooks, or whatever it's technically called, I don't think the tentacles is the proper name, it's just how it's described on the description itself. So you got a varied ways you could play the Tyranids if you so wish. It just remains to be seen again if it's possible to ignore having like a battleship to serve for your synaptic link, since the descriptions is a little bit confusing there. If you can get away with something smaller, then that opens up the windows a lot more. For the Hive ships, we're strictly the only ships capable of providing a synaptic link, and you need to be close within a certain proximity for the Battlefleet Gothic tabletop game to keep them in line. But all in all, I had an amazing time just with the little bit of playtesting I had, just devouring crew and have just been a beast, needless to say. A monstrosity of the whole galaxy and just slowly but surely devouring everything that gets in your way. And it's going to be fun to see how that actually transfers over onto the campaign, for I believe there's a lot of racial traits you have to account for playing as Tyranids. But as that, we don't really have access to that just yet until the start of the new year, so I'm itching to see what the Tyranids are capable of. But as far as real strategic value, how to get them the most out of them in combat, you probably want to board multiple ships at once as opposed to fixating on a single target, since your boarding attempts can easily be countered to a limited extent just by your enemy just boarding their own ships. You can lightning strike, you can do regular boarding assaults, and that will easily replenish the crew. Mind you, their ships are heavily crippled as a result and easy to just bring back down again. You will need to keep that in mind if you are going with the troop killing approach. So if you knocked out multiple ships, especially an entire group that's separate from the rest of them, then they're not going to do anything for a good long while, and you can almost intercept any other cruisers before they can get in there to start a chain reaction of like lightning strikes to bring the ships back up. There is one little tidbit I did not really get to talk about, for I kind of did not really consider much about it, since it's like a general mechanic of the game, and that's when you eat or kill off the entire portion of a crew on a ship. Instead of like being able to board there, you also have the chance to just scuttle the ship and immediately cause like a void explosion. And the reason this is noteworthy is the fact that there was a unique behavior between the Tyranids with their super powerful boarding potential and what happened with the opponent, which you had the choice to just automatically self-destructing your ship in the tabletop game, and in the case of this, they just straight up made that a general mechanic, which is why it was overlooked up to this point. But it is some nice little touch there, since this was a unique mechanic to strictly Tyranids, and since they are almost exclusively the main faction you're going to be using that's going to kill crew almost exclusively, it is really nice to see that kind of homage to the Tyranids, and it may very likely be a good way to kind of damage and cripple a fleet if they ever clump up on a single target. But otherwise, this has been fun. I have enjoyed the Tyranids, and I'm itching to do a little bit more when the time allows for it. Thank you everyone for watching.